Within the JI-TENGE family, we have an Oscar KAMBONA. Actually, his name is Oscar KAMBONA Mlanda. I'll come to talk about him, but his father, when I was growing up, his father, Joseph Nasongo Mlanda, used to talk about Joseph KAMBONA. So later on in life, I tried to find out who Oscar KAMBONA was. Oscar KAMBONA was born on 13th August 1928 near Songea, Ruvuma area in Tanzania. His father, David KAMBONA, was among the first Anglican preacher stroke teacher. Remember, Seroni's father was also an Anglican preacher stroke teacher. Those days, Anglican Church used to be called Africa Inland Mission before it converted into African Inland Church. He went to a middle school called Liuli in Tanzania. That is where he went to middle school. Then he went to Alliance Secondary School in Dodoma. Yes, his father was a preacher, stroke teacher, but the father could not, was used to struggle to get his school fees of 30 pounds per year. Then one day, while at school, Oscar KAMBONA recited the Lord's Prayer in English. You want me to say it in English? Tatana biso yo ozalina lola, bapesi yo kombo na yo lokumu. That is Lord's Prayer in Lingala language. But he recited the Lord's Prayer in English. It pleased an Anglican preacher, Mzungu Anglican preacher, who decided to pay his 30 pounds annual school fees for the rest of his schooling days. CBC haikuanza leo. Then he went to Tabora Boys High School. No, it was called Tabora Boys Senior School. He went to Tabora Boys Senior School, where among his teachers was one Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who later became the president of Tanganyika and then Tanzania. There they developed a friendship for a long time. Actually, when Oscar KAMBONA married his wife, the best man was Julius Kambarage Nyerere. That was before Tanganyika attained independence. Just before Tanganyika attained independence, Julius Kambarage Nyerere started a political party called TANU. Remember those days, people used to like ANU. Tanzania was TANU, Tanzania African National Union. In Kenya, KANU, Kenya African National Union. In Zimbabwe, there was ZANU, Zimbabwe African National Union. So when Julius Kambarage Nyerere started TANU, Oscar KAMBONA became its first Secretary General. Then when he became the Secretary General, Tanganyika got independent, and Nyerere was the president. Rashid Kawawa was the vice president, and Oscar KAMBONA was the Secretary General of the ruling party, and at first he was the Minister for Defense, then later on became the Minister for Foreign Affairs. He became the Minister for Foreign Affairs. But countrywide, Tanganyika-wide, let me not say Tanzania, Tanganyika-wide, Oscar KAMBONA was the second most popular person. The first most popular person was Julius Kambarage Nyerere. The second was Oscar KAMBONA, and the third person was Rashid Kawawa, the vice president. Sio Tanzania peke yake. I don't know whether Kenyans have noticed that this video, we are as if we are talking about Tom Mboya, isn't it? Tom Mboya was the second most popular after president. He was even more popular than Joseph Murumbi, the vice president, and Daniel Arap Moi, vice president. So, in 1964, there was a mutiny in East Africa. The first mutiny was in Tanganyika. The second mutiny was in Kenya, and the third mutiny was in Uganda. So when in Kenya, when we had that mutiny, the soldiers were court-martialed by Ndolo. Lieutenant Colonel Lieutenant Colonel Ndolo was the presiding officer for the court-martials. And you see, his senior was Mulinge. Mulinge was a deputy army commander, but they were of the same rank. And Ndolo used to head Gilgil. So when Ndolo headed the court-martial, President Kenyatta promoted him to be a full colonel, making him automatic deputy to Brigadier Hadi. And Mulinge, who was a deputy, went to Gilgil to be the head. That is how Mulinge and Ndolo differed for the rest of their life. In Tanzania, the soldiers went on mutiny. They wanted several conditions, including that Africans be commissioned as officers and the British to leave. Nyerere, being the president, and Rashid Kawawa, being the vice president, were whisked away for their security and taken to a secret place. And they were taken to a secret place. Remember, it is like what happened in Kabarak 1982. History keeps on repeating itself. They were whisked to a safe place under heavy security. Oscar KAMBONA took his vehicle, went into the military barrack, and talked to the heads of the mutiny. He confronted them. The demands that they wanted, what he felt the government could do, he promised them. What he felt the government could not do it, he told them. So the mutiny in Tanzania was crushed because of two things. One, Oscar KAMBONA's diplomacy, and two, you know, the officers' corps in, you know, East Africa had gained independence, but the military was still under KAR, King's African Rifle, which was a unitary military under the Queen. So the second reason, apart from Oscar KAMBONA's diplomacy, the second way where these things were good was through military intervention by the British government. This thing became so popular that much later, when Oscar KAMBONA and Julius Kabarange Nyerere disagreed, Oscar KAMBONA used to say, ulijificha kwa nyumba ya nyasi, you know those African huts, wakati mimi niliconfront wanajeshi. In 1965, Nyerere went around the country campaigning for single party. Oscar KAMBONA said no. First of all, TANU is very popular. You know, your party can be so popular like ANC in South Africa, where other parties you have 10 parties scrambling for 10% of the votes. So he wanted that type of single party, where your party becomes so popular that the other parties just die a natural death but Nyerere wanted it by law. That was the first incident that they disagreed on. That was in 1965. In 1967, or let's say in 1966, Nyerere went around campaigning to have ujamaa, where people used to stay in villages like the Jewish kibbutz. You know, Jewish have got villages called kibbutz. A Jewish kibbutz and kijiji cha ujamaa, Tanzania, are the easiest similarities one can give. So in 1966, Nyerere went around and saying, let us have ujamaa. And KAMBONA said vijiji vya ujamaa is not a bad idea, but let us not have the whole country adopting. Why don't we have areas? Let's say we take certain areas, we try with that vijiji ya ujamaa, then as they succeed, we continue adding more and more area until the whole country is under the vijiji vya ujamaa. But if it doesn't work, we reverse it and come back to that. But Nyerere refused, and those are the days of imperial presidency in Africa. So in February 1967, there was the Arusha Declaration. In July 1967, Oscar KAMBONA fled to exile. When he fled to exile, now propaganda started. There is a Kikuyu saying that there are two Kikuyu sayings which are counter each other. There is one which says that the hyena, even though a hyena is akona tamaa mingi, but he'll never eat its own child. But then there is another proverb in Kikuyu which is opposite of that. It says when a hyena wants to eat its child, it starts telling the child, hey, unanuka kama mbuzi. So I'll use the second proverb, which is counter to the first one. Give somebody a bad name, then the people will follow. So Nyerere, you know, Oscar KAMBONA as the Minister for Foreign Affairs, his ministry used to handle issues of Southern Africa liberation. There was Rhodesia, there was Mozambique, there was South Africa, and then there was Southwest Africa, which later became Namibia. So Tanzania Ministry of Foreign Affairs used to get funds for training and running of the guerrilla people there, and they even had a military camp for those people. And the money used to be channeled through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Tanzania, whose minister was Oscar KAMBONA. So when he fled to exile, Nyerere, I've just said, you want to eat your own child, you say you start smelling like a goat. So Nyerere said that KAMBONA was very corrupt, and KAMBONA had stolen the liberation money and ran away to exile with it. KAMBONA stayed in London, in Britain, and he used to live a hand to mouth. You could not even know that he was the person who was a minister for. We had even Tanzanians there who were living a better life than him by far. So the allegation by Nyerere that Oscar KAMBONA was living on money stolen from liberation money was, as I said, like the second proverb of the Kikuyu, telling your child that you smell like a goat so that you eat it. Oscar KAMBONA did not wait for long. In 1968, Colonel Chief Omeka Ojukwu declared that Iboland in Nigeria had formed a new republic called Republic of Biafra. Tanzania was among the few countries that recognized the Biafra Republic. the then president of, or can I say the then military ruler of Nigeria, Colonel Yakub Gowon, then invited Oscar KAMBONA in June 1968 to go and give lectures in Nigeria. He went and, if there is any money he ever got in life, then that money is the money that he got while giving lectures in Nigeria on how Tanzania had used or misused money from the liberation movement and gave it to Ojukwu to start a Biafra country. He continued staying in Britain or England under that condition until when multi-party came back, and he returned back to Tanzania. I wanted to talk about the Biafra War, but I'd rather do it under a different video. Well, now coming back to Oscar KAMBONA Mulanda from my family, from the JI-TENGE family. I'm related to every prominent person. Now, there is my cousin brother, the late Joseph Nasongo Mulanda. His father and Lando were stepbrothers. His father was a stepbrother to my father, and so his father was Baba Mkubwa, and my father was Baba Mdogo to Joseph. I used to spend a lot of time with Joseph Nasongo Mulanda, especially from my Form 1 to Form 3. And those days, whenever he had anything disturbing him, he would talk to me, Form 1, Form 2, Form 3 boy. Joseph Nasongo Mulanda had children, daughters only. And people, especially from the JI-TENGE family, were pushing him to marry a second wife. Because this wife, people used to believe those days that if your wife gives birth to, let's say, girls only or boys only, the blame is on your wife. So they were telling him to marry another wife. The other wife would give him sons. And he would talk what we nowadays talk. Mtoto ni mtoto, and he would, with a serious face, confront them and say that nothing wrong with not having kids, nothing wrong with having girls only, nothing wrong with having boys only. I'm contented. I love my wife. There's no decision. I don't even think of me marrying a second wife. He used to talk that seriously. But when I am with him one-on-one, the fact that he did not have a son used to bore him down. He would have a very serious face, and he would say, God has denied me sons. And if I would have had a son, I would have named him Oscar KAMBONA. Well, by then I was not an intelligence officer, because if I were an intelligence officer, I'd ask him why the name Oscar KAMBONA. But every time he would say, by the way, he had given up hope. By that time, when I was in Form 3, he had already given up hope. He said, if I would have had a boy, I would have called him Oscar KAMBONA. But since God has decided I'll not have a boy, I've accepted that. I'll just be like, after all, with the girls, I'm better off than somebody with no kids. I later went to Form 6. I later joined the police, went to those operation areas, West Pokot, North Rift, Northeastern, so on and so forth, until 20-something years later, after I had been sacked. One day I was working at home. I found a group of young boys coming from school, and I asked each and every boy, wewe ni mtoto wa nani? Wewe ni mtoto wa nani? Wewe ni mtoto wa nani? Halfway, the boy told me, I am a son to Joseph Nasongo. At home, he was called Nasongo Mulanda. I'm a son to Nasongo Mulanda. I told him, are you Oscar Kambona? The boy was shocked. The boy was shocked, and I just left. About 10 years later, the boy called me, uko Rongai, and asked me, Baba Mdogo, how is it that when we met, you are the first person who, when I told him I'm the son of Nasongo Mulanda, you just told me you must be Oscar Kambona. That is when I told him about Oscar Kambona. Because initially, before I did my research, I assumed, because in the JI-TENGE lineage, there's nobody called Oscar Kambona. So initially I used to think that Oscar Kambona must have been Nasongo's favorite. Oscar Kambona must be Nasongo's favorite maternal uncle, because I didn't know about his maternal family. But yes, if you ask me, my cousin brother, or we can call it big brother, Joseph Nasongo Mulanda, admired Thomas Joseph Mboya, and he also admired Oscar Kambona. It was not an equal admiring. I would say that he admired Oscar Kambona more than Tom Mboya, but he admired them on the same level.